Hello everyone! Welcome to another episode of Sly Kid Serious. Today we're going to be talking about pine cones and why they open and close. Have you ever been on a walk and wondered why sometimes pine cones are open, whereas other times they're closed? To understand this question, you first need to know what a pine cone is and a bit more about the life cycle of a pine tree. A pine cone is simply a protective covering for a pine seed, which will eventually go into a pine tree. A pine tree has two types of pine cones, male pine cones and female pine cones. Male pine cones are a lot smaller and contain pollen sacs, whereas female pine cones are a bit larger and go towards the top of the tree and contain seeds. Every spring, male pine cones will open up their scales to release pollen. This pollen will get blown by the wind to the female pine cones, which will get fertilized. The fertilization process for some pine cones can take up to 10 years. During this process, the pine cone turns brown and woody. In some cases, the female pine cone will fall to the ground and then release its seed, whereas in other cases, it'll release its seed while still in the tree and then it'll fall to the ground. This is where the question comes in. And here's the answer. When pine cones are in very wet and humid conditions, they'll close up their scales because when it's wet and humid, it's very hard for the scales to move a long distance. And if the scales are close together, it lowers their chances of survival. But they'll open up their scales when it's hot and dry. In these conditions, it's a lot easier for seeds to spread far apart. If you take a look at pine cones, they come in many different shapes, but they all have that same characteristic. This means that any pine cone can be considered as a hygrometer, which is an instrument that's used to measure the humidity, which is the amount of moisture in the air. This is because they change shape when the humidity changes, which also makes them a special type of living thing called hygromorph, which is something that changes shape when the humidity changes. I did an experiment to test this, taking 3 pine cones, leaving one exposed to air, putting one in hot water, and putting another in cold water. As you can see, the ones that I put in water are completely closed, whereas the one that I put in air is still opened. And nothing has happened to this. This proves that pine cones open and close due to changes in humidity. Now let's get to how pine cones open and close. Pine cones have a special midrib. When it's moist, it'll take on water and it'll expand, which will close up the scales. And when the midrib dries out, it shrinks and compresses itself, which opens the scales. This is why pine cones open and close. As a bonus, you can see that there are many different species of pine cone, which all look different, such as large loblolly pines and slash pines, and many more species. This is why pine cones open and close. Bye everyone, thanks for watching! See you on another episode of Sly Kid Serious.